I was sitting on my usual stool, staring at my half-full glass, when the noise reached a new crescendo. Another group of happy partygoers had apparently entered the bar. Damn, I hate this time of year. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I heard you correctly. Did you say you hate Christmas? A voice next to me asked. Damn, I must have spoken my thoughts out loud and I hadn't meant to do that. But it was what I was thinking. Yes. What is everyone so damn happy about? Disturbing my peace, that's what, I replied, not looking at whoever was addressing me. Well, come now, my friend. That's not exactly what you should be doing. It's Christmas, you know, a time of happiness and goodwill for all people. They're all just trying to have fun, commented the voice next to me. When I turned around, I saw a short but rather rotund old man with white hair and a false beard sitting on the bar stool next to me. To be honest, he looked like one of those store Santa Clauses who had stopped for a drink on the way home from work. Where the hell did he come from? I thought to myself. I don't remember noticing him. With the crush at the Rose and Crown that night, the Queen of England could have walked in and no one would have seen her. Look, my friend, I come into this pub almost every night for a quiet drink and to drown my sorrows. Maybe I have a little chat with George the barman or a couple of my friends. None of us have anything to be particularly happy about. We all live alone, with our own demons, and frankly, we prefer the bar to be quiet. We don't like having all those idiots running around wishing everyone a bloody Merry Christmas. I frowned in the old man's direction. We all have our problems in life, my friend, but you should try to relax once in a while. Now is the time to forget your problems and be happy, the old geezer smiled back at me. Why do people think they can understand your problems without knowing anything about you? I was annoyed with that old man. You just tell me why the hell I should be happy. I frowned back. That cocky old bastard was getting on my nerves, so I decided to tell him everything in order. Once he heard my goddamn story, he'd realize I had nothing to be happy about. Listen, 3 bleeding years ago, after years of what I thought was a happy marriage, I came home from work sick and found my so-called loving wife sleeping with her boss in my bed. I gritted my teeth, feeling the old anger rise again. She heartily kicked my arse out, and then the bitch got up and ran off with the prick. He had a lot more money than I did. And when it came to divorce court, the bitch got custody of not only my 3 kids, but my dog as well. What did the damn bitch do then? I'll tell you. She made it very difficult for me to have access to the kids for the next 18 months. I was running around the courts like a goddamn yo-yo, trying to get those bastards to make her give me the access to the kids I should have had. These damn family courts don't give a crap about fathers. And then the CSA, the child support agency, those bastards came down on me like a ton of bleeding bricks. They took most of my freaking wages as child support for the next goddamn year or so. Those goddamn bastards were taking my paycheck from my employer before I even saw it, so I couldn't afford to buy the kids many Christmas presents that year. I wouldn't mind if the cow and her freaking stallion needed the damn money. But the asshole she lives with owns the company she worked for. He makes more in a week than I do in a year. You know what those bastards did that Christmas? Well, I'll bloody well tell you. They opened my presents to the kids before Christmas. Then those bastards went and got more expensive versions of what I brought the kids and gave them to the kids first. And at Christmas, they wouldn't let me anywhere near the kids. The next time I saw my kids, my gifts were forgotten, and the kids were playing with the more expensive toys. Ah, I see you have a vindictive ex-wife. But remember, my friend, when they grow up, your children will realize that you love them. Here's something they'll never be able to do, Mr. Last Christmas bitch. That git took the kids on vacation. They went skiing in France. But one night they went out and this asshole got drunk as hell. On the way back to the hotel, the bastard threw his bleeding Merc into a lake. Oh, he made sure he and the whore got out of the car. But my kids were still buckled in their car seats when the car was pulled out of the goddamn lake the next morning. That bastard killed my kids. Now you see why I don't like Christmas. It brings me no joy, only bad memories. My friend, I'm sorry you've had such a bad couple of years, but you should try to move on with your life. You should really try to forget and start a new life. Just try to remember the good times you had with your children. Honestly, there were no good times. Once they moved in with that asshole, they got everything they wanted. The kids didn't want to know me anymore. They were spoiled to death. I only saw them once a damn month. They just forgot me. The old man was still smiling at me. I was tempted to tell him to piss off and leave me alone, but there were so many people in the pub that he couldn't have moved away from me even if he'd wanted to. What you have told me is very hurtful to hear, he continued, but you must have had good times before your wife left home. And now, of course, you must accept the fact that your old life is gone. Perhaps you should try to build a new one. The old man and I sat at the bar and talked until closing time. Toward the end of the conversation, I started to warm up to him a little. I think he really cared about me and was trying to convince me to forget the past and look forward to the future. He left the pub a little before I did, and I watched him make his way somewhat uncertainly towards the exit. When he left, I finished my pint, said goodnight to George, and started on my way home. I don't know if I was lucky or unlucky not to have a car that night. Lucky that I couldn't drive home in the intoxicated state I was in because I could have hit someone and killed them. But I was unlucky because I couldn't drive into a tree and kill myself, which I really wanted to do. Stepping outside the pub, I found the old man leaning against the wall. No doubt he had drunk far more alcohol than he could handle. Shit, I thought. I can't leave the old bastard here. If it gets any colder, he might freeze to death. Come on, Daddy, where do you live? I guess I'll have to walk you home. That's very nice of you, Jake. I'm feeling a little insecure. I'll be all right once I've been out in the fresh air for a while. I didn't pay any attention to it then, but this old man knew my name. I never could figure it out. Maybe he heard George say it. We headed in the direction of his house. To my relief, it wasn't too far out of my way. The old man leaned against me and chatted about life. I have to admit, I wasn't really listening, but it felt good to have some company. When we finally reached his place, he fumbled with his keys, and I helped him inside. He turned to me, eyes twinkling with gratitude, and said, "Thank you, Jake. Sometimes all it takes is a little kindness to change someone's night." I gave a half-hearted smile and nodded. "Take care, old man." As I walked away, I felt a strange warmth in my chest. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe, just maybe, it was the first flicker of something resembling hope. So I didn't memorize a word of what he was saying. I just wanted to get him home and then crawl into my own bed. Suddenly, the old man stood up straight as if he wasn't drunk anymore. "Fire!" he shouted. A little confused, I looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the smoke-blackened windows of the neighboring house, I could see a Christmas tree engulfed in flames. Then, with an almighty explosion, the picture window blew outward. The next second, the whole room was a roaring inferno, and flames engulfed the front of the building. "A woman and 3 children live in this house," said the old man. Suddenly, I was as sober as a judge. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and, unlocking the keypad, handed it to the old man. "Call the fire department," I ordered him, running toward the house. They say that people do brave things because they don't think about the consequences of their actions. I have to tell you that as I rushed to the front door, I knew there was a good chance I wouldn't see the morning, and deep down, I didn't care. I felt the heat of the flames from the neighboring window as I approached the door, which, to my surprise, yielded with a thud. Clouds of black smoke enveloped me as I staggered inside, barely able to keep my balance. At this time of night, I figured that anyone left alive in the house was probably upstairs in the bedrooms. Most of these 2-family houses have a similar layout, and I had no trouble finding the stairs. Climbing them 2 at a time, I rushed up, trying to yell about the fire at the same time, but the smoke was choking me, and I couldn't speak. At the top of the stairs, I found the door to a room directly above the heart of the fire, and the first thing I did was go there. Inside the room, I groped all around, surprisingly encountering much smoke, until I discovered the inanimate forms of 2 small children lying in their beds. I picked them both up in my arms, and the next thing I knew, I was coming out of the smoke by the front door. There was some young guy standing there, and I literally threw the 2 little girls at him. After taking a few deep breaths of clean air to regain my composure, I turned around and went back into the smoke. This time, I could see that the flames were beginning to reach the door of the room where the fire had been. When I reached the top of the stairs, there was a whooshing noise. I made my way to the next room, which had a closed door. Kicking it open, I found the woman and her third child huddled together in the corner, coughing and terrified. I grabbed the child first and carried him down the stairs, yelling for the woman to follow me. She hesitated, but the urgency in my voice finally got her moving. As we neared the bottom of the stairs, a loud cracking sound came from above, and part of the ceiling collapsed behind us. We stumbled out the front door, and I practically threw the boy into the arms of the young guy who was still standing there. The mother collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. By then, the fire department had arrived, and firefighters were rushing in with hoses and gear. I stood there, hands on my knees, gulping down air as if I'd never breathed before. The old man came up to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You did it, Jake. You saved them." I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Yeah," I muttered, "but damn, I need a drink." He chuckled and patted me on the back. "Let's get you home, hero." And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of something other than bitterness in my heart. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for me yet. The flames had swallowed the door, and the fire was spreading into the hallway. Through the dense smoke, I glanced back at the stairs, realizing that my original route was now completely blocked. I had no choice but to head to the back bedroom. Inside, I found a woman, barely conscious and covered in soot. I'm not a very big guy, and to this day, I can't explain how I managed to lift her. One look out the back window told me escape that way was impossible. The flames were shooting out from the windows below. There must have been a see-through living room downstairs. Funny how such irrelevant thoughts pop into your mind in moments of crisis. Returning to the landing, I made a beeline for the other front bedroom. Swinging the door open, I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I saw the flashing blue lights of the fire engines through the window. I quickly placed the woman on the bed, inadvertently laying her on top of her son, who was also there. Without a second thought, I grabbed the TV from its bracket on the wall and hurled it through the window, shattering the glass. I quickly knocked out the remaining shards, creating a clear escape path. First, I grabbed the boy and, leaning out of the window, handed him down to a waiting firefighter. Next, I helped the woman out. She was too weak to resist, allowing me to guide her to safety. With the flames now roaring into the room, I didn't have time to think. I dove headfirst through the window, hoping the firefighters below were prepared. They caught me expertly, as if they were trained to expect people to leap from burning buildings into their arms. They quickly fitted me with a breathing apparatus, helping to clear the smoke from my lungs. I sat on the sidewalk, gasping for air, while firefighters battled the blaze. Nearby, ambulance crews attended to the woman and her son. I didn't see the two girls, but several ambulances were present, so I assumed they were in good hands. My head was pounding, a mix of smoke inhalation and the remnants of the night's drinking session. People came up to congratulate me, calling me a hero, but I didn't want or need the attention. Soon, the police arrived, pushing back the crowd. Seizing the opportunity, I quietly slipped away into the night. When I got home, I took a long shower to rid myself of the smoke smell. I initially thought I would take my clothes to the cleaners, but after noticing the burn marks, I decided to throw them away. By the time I finally crawled into bed, it was past 2 in the morning. The next day, Christmas Eve, I woke up around 10 with the worst hangover of my life. I think it was half from the beer and half from the smoke. I was in the kitchen, downing coffee with a couple of aspirin, when my cell phone rang. I found it on the dining room table and answered it. "Hello, is this Jake Stark?" An unfamiliar female voice asked. "Yes, what's the problem?" I responded, slipping back into my old monotonous tone that usually kept people at bay. "Oh, Mr. Stark, I just wanted to thank you for saving me and my children last night." "Who's this?" I asked, still groggy and confused. "I'm Ella Monroe. It was me and my children you pulled out of the fire last night. I just wanted to thank you. We would have died if you hadn't saved us." "I'm afraid I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about, lady," I said, figuring denial was the best strategy. He said you would say that, but I know it was you who saved our lives by pulling us out of the fire last night. So don't try to deny it, or I'll tell the papers who you are. And from what your friend told me, you wouldn't want that. The press is going crazy trying to find you. You know that? Okay, it was me, but you're welcome. I didn't think about it. I just did it. You really don't need to thank me, I replied, trying to keep it casual. But curiosity got the better of me. By the way, how did you know where to find me? Oh, your friend, a nice elderly gentleman, came by the other day. He said he was a friend of yours. He told me who you were and gave me your number. Would you like to talk to him? Yes, I would. I have a lot to talk to him about. He left with my cell phone last. I trailed off, realizing something strange. What the hell was I talking about? I was talking to Ella Monroe on my cell phone. But last night, I gave it to the old man to call the fire brigade, and after I walked out of the burning house, I never saw him again. How the hell did I get my phone back? And how did he know my name? Oh, I think he's gone. I don't see him anywhere. Don't let it bother you, Ella said, her voice full of gratitude and warmth. I hung up, still bewildered. The events of the previous night swirled in my head. Who was that old man? And how had he known so much about me? It seemed there were more questions than answers. I think he has a habit of disappearing, I muttered to myself. Mr. Stark, I realize this is a bit of a burden on Christmas Eve, but is there any chance you could stop by the hospital today? I would really like for me and my children to have a chance to meet and thank you in person. We won't tell anyone who you are if that's what you want. Damn and blast, I thought. She asked so sweetly, how the hell could I say no? If you insist. But just knowing you're safe and healthy is already thanks enough for me. What a hypocrite I was. I didn't give a damn about her or her children, and I couldn't understand why I'd run into a burning house last night, except maybe in an unconscious attempt to kill myself. But I agreed to visit her a little later. It was probably around 30 minutes later when I found her in the hospital. Ella Monroe was wearing the strangest collection of clothes I'd ever seen. Well, I hadn't given them time to get dressed the night before, had I? Ella recognized me as soon as I entered the room. Oh, Jake, it's so good of you to come, she said, wrapping her arms around my neck and talking to me like I was an old family friend. There were 2 other people in the room who asked if I was her husband. She told them, no, Jake is just a special friend. The couple left us alone, and then Ella apologized for her behavior, explaining that the other people were reporters and she thought they might wonder who I was. I thanked her, and then she took me to meet her children. I was amazed that they all seemed to recognize me. The meeting, while friendly, felt overwhelming and awkward to me. Let's face it, I didn't know this family, and their gratitude made me uncomfortable. They reminded me of what I had lost. The kids were about the same age as mine had been, well, maybe a little younger. I really wanted to bow out and leave. I shouldn't have gone there. The older of the 2 girls, Alex, who was about 8 years old, clung to my left arm and hung on tight. Then the boy Jacob, about a year or so younger, came over and clung to my right arm and wouldn't let go. Little Yvette must have felt left out, but she solved the problem by climbing into my lap and wrapping her arms around my neck. I really didn't know what to say to them. I noticed the big bruise on Alex's face and remembered the bump on her shoulder when I'd picked her up the night before. But she never mentioned it. I had only been there for a short time when a woman from social services came in. She asked Elif she had any relatives or friends they could stay with, but she had none. The woman then informed Elif that she and her children would be put up in a local boarding house. I knew what a dump she was referring to and felt a pang of sympathy for them. The place was notorious, a real hellhole, packed with asylum seekers and illegals awaiting deportation. I don't know why I did it, but suddenly I heard myself telling Ella that she and her kids could stay with me for a while. I had room, I knew that much, but why I extended the invitation, I couldn't fathom. Even more surprising was Sheila's immediate acceptance of my offer. It was completely out of character for me to suggest such a thing, and just as strange for Alado, accept lodging from a complete stranger. The day took an even weirder turn as all 4 of us climbed into my car and drove to my home. I realized halfway there that I had no food in the house, so we stopped by the supermarket. We ended up with 4 carts full, essentially doing Christmas shopping for 5. As we stood at the checkout counter, I glanced at my new guests and noticed they had barely any clothes. So, we made another stop at a nearby clothing store, and my credit card took another hit, although Ella assured me she would reimburse me, which she eventually did. When we finally arrived at my house, I showed them where they could settle in. It was rather painful to see these children in my kids' old rooms. I told AICHI could take my bed while I used the cot in my study downstairs, keeping us on separate floors to avoid any awkward situations. Ella seemed to appreciate the gesture, and I felt it was the right move to make. To the kids' disappointment, the house wasn't decorated for Christmas, so I dug out the artificial tree and a box of ornaments. The children and I set about transforming the house with a flurry of activity. As usual, the Christmas lights gave me trouble, taking forever to check each bulb before they finally lit up. Ella faced the issue of Christmas presents for her kids, which I resolved by digging out the gifts I had bought for my children the previous year. They had never received them, and I had stored them away in a closet, trying to forget about them. It pained me to bring them out, but seeing the children's joy made it worthwhile. Christmas morning turned out to be the best I'd had in years. Watching the kids tear open their presents filled me with a strange, bittersweet feeling. Ella took charge of cooking Christmas dinner while I played with the kids. Around noon, a man from Sheila's insurance company arrived. He was a legal advisor and came to reassure Ella that she had nothing to worry about. The company would handle the house repairs and inform her when and where to select replacement furniture and carpets. Jesus, they're on a roll, I said to Ella as he walked away. You're not kidding, she replied. I haven't even told them about the fire yet. I wonder how they knew where to find me. We never managed to figure that out. Later, when we asked, the insurance company said they got a call on Christmas Eve about the fire and filed a claim on Sheila's behalf. Strangely, their records showed the call was made in the morning, long before I went to the hospital to meet Ella and invited her and her kids to stay with me. That Christmas was a great one for me. Yes, I kissed Ella under the mistletoe, but it was a respectful kiss, and we only did it because the kids insisted. When the house was full of children again, the neighbors quickly noticed. More specifically, the neighbors' kids. I looked out the kitchen window on Boxing Day and saw a few of them in the garden playing with Sheila's children. Suddenly, people who had avoided my gaze for years started smiling and waving enthusiastically at me. They also began stopping me on the street to chat. I thought we were just starting to settle into our new place when New Year's Eve arrived. At midnight, there was a knock on the door. Half a dozen neighbors came in waving, liquor bottles popped open, and before anyone knew it, an impromptu party had erupted. Before my wife left me, this was a regular New Year's Eve tradition. I think the neighbors avoided me for the next couple of years, as I turned into a recluse. Now, they seem determined to make up for lost time. I won't go into details because, frankly, I don't remember much about that night. It all blurred until I realized the neighbors had gone home, and Ella and Juan, having drunk far more than we should have, were making out on the couch. It wasn't a big deal, but suddenly I became aware that one hand was on Sheila's chest and the other on her leg, under the hem of her dress. I didn't know what I was thinking or what I thought I was doing, but it struck me that this was not the right thing to do. Ella's a very attractive woman. I don't think many men would turn her down, but there's nothing special about me, so I wondered why she was letting me do this. I didn't want her to feel she had to sleep with me out of gratitude. She was thankful for me saving her and her children's lives and giving them a place to stay. So, I abruptly ended our encounter. Ella looked a bit surprised and embarrassed, remaining silent for a moment before quickly retreating to her room. We never talked about what happened that night again, and we never came close to being intimate after that. However, in the months that followed, I believe we became very close friends. But it was a very strange situation where we both made an effort to avoid any physical contact. You know how it is, going around the other side of the room instead of squeezing past each other. I became Uncle Ray to the kids because little Yvette had trouble pronouncing Jake. When Yvette tried, it came out sounding like Ray or something close, and soon the other two kids started calling me Uncle Ray too. To keep things simple and avoid confusing the kids, Ella started calling me Ray as well. Over the next few months, the neighborhood kids began calling me Uncle Ray too. Before I knew it, Ray became my new name. During those months, I spent a lot of time with Sheila's children. When you have your own kids at home, you tend to take them for granted. I know I did with mine. When they're suddenly gone, you miss them and all the things you used to do together. Having Sheila's children around felt like a second chance for me, though some evenings I found myself melancholic, wondering if I had been the best father I could have been to my own children. Over time, I learned that Sheila's husband had committed suicide. His business had failed, and he couldn't cope. He had a nervous breakdown, fell into a deep depression, and eventually took his own life. I didn't find out all at once, nor did I learn it all from Sheila. Instead, I pieced it together bit by bit. The work on Sheila's house began fairly quickly, but we were told right away that it would take quite a while. The heat had been so intense that much of the house's structure was damaged and needed almost a complete rebuild. Even the neighbors on the other side of the duplex had to move out temporarily while they rebuilt the shared wall. Every week, the five of us traveled to the house to check on the progress. To outsiders, life at my house seemed quite normal. To those who didn't know us, Ella and I looked like a married couple living together with our 3 children. But it wasn't like that. There wasn't the closeness that a husband and wife usually share. For the first few months, Ella and I left the house only for shopping, visits to the cemetery, where Sheila's husband and my children are buried, and trips to her house to see the renovation progress. As time went on, I found myself voluntarily getting involved in the kids' school activities. I became very engaged in Jacob and Alex's extracurricular events. The reaction of the teachers was interesting. Some had taught my own children and knew about their deaths. I recall one teacher stumbling once when he mistakenly called Alex by my daughter's name. He was very embarrassed when Alex corrected him. I bring this up because I've never made that mistake, even though sometimes it felt like, in my dreams, the children blended into each other, not quite distinct. As my relationship with the kids grew closer, my relationship with Ella stayed the same. We kept a distance from each other. Yet I often caught myself watching her out of the corner of my eye in the evenings. She was an attractive woman, and sometimes I thought she was watching me too. In the summer, I took them all camping in Wales. It was a new experience for Ella and the kids. They used a frame tent, while I used my old camping tent. Once they got the hang of it, living without modern conveniences, they really enjoyed it, and we spent a few more weekends camping throughout the summer. By the end of summer, we, or rather Sheila, were choosing paint colors, furniture, flooring, and other things for her house. I drove her around as I had since she moved in, and she often asked for my advice. Not that I was an expert. In October, the house was nearing completion, and the plan was to move in during the last week of the month. But because of problems with the central heating system, the move was postponed until the beginning of November. Then, quite unexpectedly, I found myself in an empty house again. I knew this day would come, but that first evening when I came home from work to an empty house was a real heartbreaker. I looked around and immediately went outside. My destination was the Rose and Crown, and as I walked up the street, I wondered if someone had taken my usual bar stool. I hadn't been there since the previous Christmas. Although I was headed to the Rose and Crown, I somehow, without thinking, drove past Sheila's house. Through the window, I saw the kids sitting down to eat and Ella standing there, talking on the phone. It crossed my mind to walk up the path and knock on the door, but somehow I couldn't bring myself to do it. At the pub, my stool was empty, and George greeted me with, "Hello, Jake," and started pulling my pint as if I'd been there yesterday. "Ray," I corrected him. "Everyone calls me Ray now." "I don't care, Ray," George replied, and continued to serve me. I drank too much that night, which I realized as soon as I woke up in my bed the next morning. The hangover, more than anything else, made me decide I wasn't going back to my old way of life. Well, That was my intention. But the world is full of good intentions, isn't it? I spent the next 2 nights in the garage. I had the idea of turning it into a workshop. I was going to take up a hobby, like woodworking or something. That way, I'd have small projects to do in the evenings and on weekends. The next night, my neighbor invited me over for dinner. I'll be honest, he was tinkering with his wife's car when I got home, and desperate to find something to do, I offered to help. As a thank you, his wife invited me to stay for dinner. I can't say I understood what was happening for the next week or so, but several neighbors asked me to join them for evening meals. Now, looking back, I realize it was all planned. Just by chance, a husband or wife would happen to be outside when I came home from work, and they'd start chatting. The next thing I knew, I was sitting at their dinner table. Often, we talked about Ella and the kids, but all I could say was that I hadn't seen them since they moved away. This usually resulted in strange looks from the wives and awkward silences from the husbands. I think it was the second or third weekend after Ella went home that I ran into her and the kids at the supermarket. To be honest, it wasn't a coincidence. The kids practically tackled me, making a scene in the store. Before I knew it, Yvette was sitting in my shopping cart with the other two hanging on my arms. Luckily, the kids were cheerful and lively, which helped, since Ella and I didn't seem to know what to say to each other. After finishing our shopping, I took them to McDonald's for ice cream. While the kids played, Ella told me about the ongoing house issues. Nothing serious, just the usual stuff. Something made me invite them all over for dinner that night. For a moment, I thought Ella hesitated, but the kids decided for her. To be fair, Ella ended up cooking the meal, maybe because she had tasted my cooking before. It was fun having the kids over after dinner, even though they mostly played with the neighborhood kids. I helped Ella in the kitchen, or perhaps hindered her, she never said which, and we got along just as well as when she was staying with me. That was until we both tried to cross the kitchen at the same time and collided near the back door. Ella lost her balance, and I grabbed her to prevent her from falling. I held her in a hug for a moment, and then we both muttered apologies and awkwardly disentangled ourselves. In the evening, we had dinner, listening to the excited kids recount their day with their friends. After I finished the dishes, I drove the family home. There was talk of them coming over again and me having dinner with them, but no specific date was set. That night, my car was left in the parking lot, a silent witness to the day's unexpected turns of the Rose and Crown. I was too drunk to drive her home. On Sunday, after I'd recovered from my hangover, I went back to the pub to pick up my car and ended up spending another night there. Honestly, I just didn't want to go back to that empty house unless I had to, or until I was so drunk I couldn't notice the silence. Monday morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went to the real estate agent to put my house on the market. I had no idea where I was going to live, but I knew I couldn't stay in that empty house any longer. Losing one family was bad enough, but losing a second was too much for me. I moved out, leaving the house furnished because the agent said it's easier to sell that way. I checked into a small residential hotel near my job. It was a nice place, but I didn't make many friends among the other guests. Since then, I reverted to being the miserable old guy I was a year ago. I received invitations in the mail to attend Sheila's children's Christmas plays and concerts at their school. I sat with Ella at all these events, feeling a bit uncomfortable as the seats were pretty tightly packed. Physical contact between Ella and me was almost impossible to avoid, and I could feel her tense up whenever we touched. There was talk again about having dinner at their house one evening, but once more, I failed to set a firm date. The kids asked if I was going to join them for Christmas, and I know they were disappointed when I told them I had other plans. I spouted some nonsense to them, trying to ease their disappointment, but it didn't make me feel any better. About going to visit my sister on the South Coast. I'm not sure Ella bought the story, but I think the kids did. I spent a lot of time choosing Christmas presents for Ella and her children, arranging for a local courier company to deliver them to her home on Christmas Day. It was expensive, but I thought it was worth the surprise. On Christmas Eve, I found myself drawn back to the Rose and Crown. Strangely, the place wasn't as crowded as it had been the year before. Perhaps it was a different night of the week. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a voice ask, "Are you happier this year, Ray?" I turned around to see an old man sitting on the stool next to me. "Oh, it's you again. Where did you come from?" I asked, surprised. I hadn't noticed him enter the pub, nor had I seen George serve him the drink he was holding. Perhaps I was in my own little world again. "I'm always around, Ray. You just can't see me." I thought the old man had already had too much to drink. "What'll you have?" I asked, signaling George to refill my glass. But the old man waved his hand, indicating he didn't want another drink at the moment. George came over with my new pint and stood there with a strange expression on his face. "It's on me, Ray, and I think you should make this your last one for the day," he said, waving away my outstretched $5 bill. I wasn't fully paying attention to what George was saying, as I had a few questions for the old man. "Listen, where did you go the night of the fire?" I asked. "When I left the house, you were nowhere to be seen." "I've been busy, Ray. Before I passed, or—" The old man paused for a few seconds, contemplating what to say. "Before I retired, I was a pediatrician. I was in the ambulance helping paramedics with the kids. When I got out, you were gone. But my phone, how did you get it back to me?" "I gave it to the policeman. You know, you didn't look too good when you left that house. He must have given it to you or put it in his pocket." I had to admit, that was how I managed to get the phone back. I couldn't remember exactly what happened or what was said when the policeman came up and asked everyone to move away from the fire. "You ended up in the hospital the next day," I said, still trying to understand this old man and his actions. "Of course, I did. I wanted to see how the kids were recovering. You know, the timing on the night of the fire was very good. A couple more minutes and it would have been a disaster. But you gave Alimony phone number. How did you know it or my name?" "From your cell phone, Ray. Your name and number are on the sticker on the back. It was a company cell phone, and since they're all the same, we labeled them to identify whose it is when they're lying around the office." As I drank my pint, I kept asking the old man questions, and he gave reasonable answers. But something about him didn't add up. "So, Ray, are you going to spend Christmas with Ella and the kids?" he asked suddenly. "No, I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "And why not?" he asked, sounding shocked. Because of what? Come out with it. Those kids are going to miss you." "Because of Sheila." I glanced around to see if anyone was within earshot. George was serving another customer at the far end of the bar, but no one else was standing close. "I think I've fallen in love with her. And that's a good reason not to spend Christmas with her. I think it's a damn good reason to spend time with her and her family, but she doesn't feel the same way about me." "What the hell gave you that idea?" "Well, I did something really stupid. Hell, I can't figure out why I'm telling you this." "Perhaps you need to. Now come out with it," the old man said. "New Year's Eve last year. She had only been at my house for a couple of days, and I'm ashamed to admit that I went a little overboard. I think I upset her." "Oh, and how did you get over the line?" "Well, I kissed her, and oh my God, I touched her inappropriately. Can we drop the subject?" "No, I don't think we can. So what did she do to make you stop?" "Nothing. Look, I've had too much to drink. Why shouldn't I be surprised at that?" the old man intervened. "Well, anyway, I suddenly realized what I was doing and stopped." "So Ella didn't stop you? You stopped yourself?" "Yes. If she didn't stop you, why did you stop? Perhaps she wanted you to continue. And maybe she let me do it out of gratitude for saving her and her family's life. I don't want a woman sleeping with me just out of gratitude." "Me out of gratitude. You didn't happen to discuss this with Sheila, did you?" "Don't be silly. That would be too embarrassing. It was already awkward for her to be in the house with me after that." "Oh, it's such a shame she didn't remove herself and her children from your home." "Well, she had nowhere to go." "Bullshit. The insurance company paid you to house her and the kids, didn't they? Ella could have moved out at any time, but why did she stay then?" "Think about it. Maybe she has fallen in love with her guardian angel," said the old man, then quietly added, "What a pity it never happened to me." "She never said anything to me. And I suppose you told her every day how you felt." "Of course not. If I told Ella how I felt and she didn't feel the same way about me, well, it would be too embarrassing for her to stay living in my house." You don't think there's the slightest chance that Ella thought exactly the same way, do you, Ray? But tell me, why don't you accept her invitations to dinner? How do you know I didn't do it? And how do you know she asked me? Let's just say it's obvious to me, okay? But you're really making a mistake. This woman has fallen in love with you. Suddenly, the doors of the pub opened and a huge crowd of customers rushed in. Conversation became impossible, and for a few minutes, I took my eyes off the old man. When things quieted down a little, I was surprised to find that he was no longer sitting on the stool beside me. "George, where did the old boy go?" I asked as he came over to refill my glass. "What's the old thing?" "The old fart I was talking to." "Jesus, Ray, you've had enough for one night. You've been sitting there talking to yourself all night. Time for you to go home, I think." George took the pint from me again and poured it into the slop tray. "Do you want me to call you a cab, Ray?" he added. "George, I think you'd better reduce the amount of sauce yourself," I told him, getting up from the stool. As soon as George thought you had had enough, I knew I wasn't going to get anything more from him that evening. On Christmas Eve, I woke up without a hangover. It was nice, but not as unexpected as if Ella hadn't lived with me for a year. Before she and the kids moved in, hangovers had been the norm for me. Like many people, I had a day off work, and I spent it hanging around the stores. I had already bought presents for the children and Sheila, and they were to be delivered in the morning. But I found a few more things that I thought they might like. After wrapping them up, I took them to the courier's office to be added to the delivery. I then went back to the hotel with a couple of bottles of liquor that I felt should have robbed me of my senses for the rest of Boxing Day. In those days, pubs didn't stay open for long at Christmas. As I was leaving the dining room at the hotel that evening, one of the other guests, a guy everyone in the hotel knew as Major, called out to me. "Mr. Stark," he asked, "do you play bridge?" "Well, I have, but I'm not that good," I replied. "Smart about it," I replied without thinking, caught off guard by his question. "Wonderful. You're just what we need," he said. "We don't take it too seriously ourselves. But Mrs. Brandt has visitors tonight. Could you make up the fourth until her visitors leave?" You know, I didn't know how to say no to that old bastard. Damn it, what is it about officers that they seem to be able to get you to do something without even trying? And here I was, already sitting with 3 old farts playing goddamn bridge instead of going to the Rose and Crown. It's only until the old lady's guests leave anyway, I thought to myself. Fat chance. The old lady never showed up, and at midnight we were still playing. The Major and the other 2 thanked me for my participation when the game was over, and they went to bed. By then, they knew how bad I was at bridge, but they didn't comment. Luckily, we weren't playing for money, or I would have gone broke. When they left, I sat in the living room for a while and watched television. It wasn't until I was in bed that I realized all I had drunk that night was a couple of glasses of sherry with the Major and his cronies. I wanted a pint or two, but drinking beer at the bridge table didn't seem right. That Christmas morning, I was up early for breakfast. God knows why. Perhaps because I hadn't drunk anything the night before. But as I came down the stairs from my room, a surprise awaited me in the waiting room. "Mr. Stark, there are packages for you," said the secretary as I came into view. I turned around quickly when she pointed to a small stack of brightly colored packages. Jesus, those were my gifts for Ella and the kids. What the hell were they doing at the hotel? Assuming the couriers had screwed up the delivery, I called them to demand the packages be sent to the correct address. But all I got was a recorded Christmas greeting and a message that the office would be open again the day after Boxing Day. You know, the old man who delivered them seemed a bit decrepit to me, commented the young receptionist, kindly ignoring the blasphemies I muttered as I hung up the phone. "Don't tell me, a short, rather chubby guy with white hair and a beard?" I said, looking at her. "Yes, that sounds like him. Do you know him?" she asked with a smile on her face. "Unfortunately, I think so. Can you call me a cab and have them deliver these for me?" "Of course, Mr. Stark. Go have breakfast, and I'll call you when the cab comes so you can pay him." The girl still hadn't called me when I left the dining room after my leisurely breakfast. I'm sorry, Mr. Stark. This doesn't make sense, but I've tried every cab service we normally use, and none of them have an available car. It may not make sense to you, but to me, young lady, when it comes to this old man, it's definitely starting to make sense. Would you mind helping me carry them to the car? When I pulled up to Sheila's house, the front door swung open, and all three children jumped out to greet me. I won't go into all the details of how the day went, but I will say that, despite my insistence that I wouldn't be there, my presence seemed to be expected. The dining room table was already set for 5. After the children had gone to bed, I asked Sheila, "Did you know I was coming?" "Of course," she replied, "but I said I wasn't coming." "Yes, that's true, but I saw your friend yesterday and he told me you would definitely come today." "Don't tell me, the little pot-bellied fellow." "Yes, the man who came to the hospital last year. He didn't happen to say anything else, did he?" "Only that I should lock the door after you came in and take your car keys." I looked at the coffee table where I had put my keys. They were gone. "Looking for these?" Ella asked, holding up my car keys. "Yes, can I have them, please?" "Sure, just come and get them," Ella replied, simultaneously pulling her dress off her chest and dropping the keys into her cleavage. Then she sat up and smiled at me. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked. "Go and get them," said Sheila, jumping up from her seat and jogging toward the living room door. "You know where the bedroom is, don't you?" "Ella and I were married in less than a month." "Well, you knew it was going to happen even if I didn't. But there's none so blind as those who don't want to see. We've lived happily in this house together for 13 years now. This Christmas Eve, I'm sitting here next to my beloved wife, looking at an old, burned photograph hanging over the fireplace. Just after our wedding, Ella finally got back some photo albums that had been found in the burned house. They had been damaged by the water and the fire itself. The insurance company had sent them to specialists to see if any of them could be salvaged. "Sheila, who is pictured here?" I asked when we were looking through them for the first time. "My grandfather, my father's father. I like this picture. Doesn't he remind you of Santa Claus? I thought he looked like an old man." "You know, the one you call my friend." "No, I don't think so. He's much shorter in stature than my grandfather. It's strange, but when I was younger, I remember him having a stern expression on his face. But now he looks so radiant. I guess memory deceives us. Life goes on."